Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching a special broadcast on DD India. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll get you all the news, views and analyses about Brazil President Jair Bolsonaro's visit to India. Now, President Bolsonaro is the chief guest for India's 71st Republic Day parade. What does his visit mean for India-Brazil ties? How can India and Brazil take their relations forward? Two special guests would join me in the studio to answer some of those questions so that you, the viewer, know what it takes to be on top of the news. Right, first let me bring you up to date on the news so far. Now, this afternoon, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Brazil President Jair Bolsonaro held bilateral talks in New Delhi. After the talks concluded, India and Brazil signed 15 agreements and MOUs in various fields, including health and medicine, cultural exchange, cooperation in the field of geology and mineral resources, agreement in the field of social security, an agreement on scientific and technological cooperation, and a joint declaration of intent for cooperation in the field of animal husbandry and dairy products, an MOU on cooperation for establishing a nodal institution in India to carry out research on bioenergy. The agreements and MOUs were exchanged in the presence of Prime Minister Modi and President Bolsonaro following delegation-level talks between the two leaders in New Delhi. President Bolsonaro is accompanied by 8 ministers, 4 lawmakers and a large business contingent.
यह हमारे लिए बहुत गर्व की बात है कि हमारे 71वें गणतंत्र दिवस पर आप हमारे मुख्य अतिथि हैं। कल राजपथ पर गणतंत्र दिवस की परेड में आप भारत की विविधता का रंग बिरंगा और उल्लासपूर्ण स्वरूप देखेंगे। ब्राजील खुद भी उल्लास से भरे पर्वों का देश है। एक मित्र के साथ इस विशेष पर्व पर हम अपनी खुशी साझा करेंगे। भारत का निमंत्रण स्वीकार करने के लिए मैं आपको धन्यवाद देता हूं। यह तीसरा अवसर है जब ब्राजील के राष्ट्रपति ने यह सम्मान हमें दिया है और भारत और ब्राजील के बीच मजबूत मित्रता का प्रतीक है।
Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi thanked President Bolsonaro for accepting India's invite to be the chief guest at the Republic Day celebrations.
भौगोलिक दूरी के बावजूद हम विश्व के अनेक मंचों पर साथ हैं और विकास के एक दूसरे के महत्वपूर्ण पार्टनर भी हैं और इसलिए आज राष्ट्रपति बोल्सोनारो और मैं हमारे द्विपक्षीय सहयोग को सभी क्षेत्रों में और बढ़ाने पर सहमत हुए हैं। हमारी स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप को और मजबूत करने के लिए एक बृहद एक्शन प्लान तैयार किया गया है। सन 2023 में दोनों देशों के बीच डिप्लोमेटिक संबंधों की प्लेटिनम जुबिली होगी। मुझे पूरा विश्वास है कि तब तक यह एक्शन प्लान हमारी स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप, पीपल टू पीपल टाइज और बिजनेस कोऑपरेशन को और गहरा बनाएगा।
Now, Prime Minister Modi also highlighted the key points of cooperation signed between the two countries in the fields of animal husbandry and dairy as well.
गायों की स्वस्थ और उन्नत प्रजातियों पर सहयोग हमारे संबंधों का एक अनूठा और सुखद पहलू है। किसी समय भारत से गीर और कांकरेजी गायें ब्राजील गई थी और आज ब्राजील और भारत इस विशेष पशुधन को बढ़ाने और उससे मानवता को लाभ पहुंचाने पर सहयोग कर रहे हैं। इस सहयोग के आर्थिक, सामाजिक और सांस्कृतिक महत्व को किसी भी भारतीय के लिए शब्दों में बयान कर पाना मुश्किल है।
Prime Minister Modi also said that India and Brazil share a common view and concerns at some of the key global issues, including security and terrorism. He also said that India and Brazil have agreed to work together at some of the global multilateral platforms.
दो बड़े लोकतांत्रिक और विकासशील देश होने के नाते महत्वपूर्ण ग्लोबल और मल्टीलेटरल मुद्दों पर भारत और ब्राजील के विचारों में गहरी समानता है, चाहे आतंकवाद की गंभीर समस्या हो या पर्यावरण का प्रश्न। विश्व के सामने मौजूदा कठिन चुनौतियों पर हमारा नजरिया बहुत मिलता जुलता है। ब्राजील और भारत के हित समान है। विशेष रूप से ब्रिक्स और इब्सा में हमारी पार्टनरशिप भारत की विदेश नीति का एक महत्वपूर्ण पहलू है। आज हमने तय किया है कि दोनों देश मल्टीलेटरल मुद्दों पर अपने सहयोग को और दृढ़ बनाएंगे और हम सुरक्षा परिषद, संयुक्त राष्ट्र और अन्य अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संगठनों में आवश्यक सुधार के लिए मिलकर प्रयासरत रहेंगे।
Now, Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro thanked Prime Minister Narendra Modi for his invite to be the chief guest at the Republic Day celebrations. He said that both countries have agreed to further consolidate the bilateral ties.
We will see more matters of mutual interest emerge between us in our agendas, given the potentials that are there and also given the very relevant profile of our two nations and economies. We will certainly make much further strides and progress. Brazil and India rank among the world's 10 largest economies today. Together we account for 1.5 billion people. And that being the case, it is just natural.
Earlier in the day, Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar called on the Brazilian president. Both leaders discussed ways to deepen ties between the two countries in a range of areas, including trade and investment. The Brazilian president is in India on a 4-day visit. President Bolsonaro was accorded a ceremonial reception at Rashtrapati Bhavan this morning. He was received by President Ramnath Kovind and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Bolsonaro will hold talks with President Kovind later in the evening over the official banquet. And earlier in the day, Bolsonaro visited Rajghat to pay floral tributes to Mahatma Gandhi. He was accompanied by Union Minister of State for External Affairs V. Muralidharan. Bolsonaro wrote in the visitor's book, and I quote here, "I am honored to visit Rajghat and pay tribute on behalf of the Brazilian people to the memory of Mahatma Gandhi. May his remarkable example of love for peace and freedom continue to inspire future generations in India and all over the world." Unquote. All right, joining me in the studio are two very special guests. Ambassador Dilip Sinha, who retired from the Indian Foreign Service. In fact, Ambassador Sinha served as India's Deputy Chief of Mission in Brazil between 1999 and 2002. Also joining me is Professor Sriram Cholia, the Dean of Jindal School of International Affairs. Gentlemen, thank you for making time to be on DD India. Appreciate it. Ambassador Sinha, if I can come to you first now. Would I be wrong in saying that South America as a continent falls in the blind spot for Indian diplomacy? Would you say that we do not prioritize South America as much as probably we should?
Yes, you're quite right. South America is a very distant continent. Brazil and all the other South American countries are very far from India. Now, of course, fortunately, the flights have improved, right, because now you can fly via Dubai and the Gulf countries. Earlier, you had to go to London or to the US to fly down to South America. So, in terms of flying time, it's very far. In terms of the distance, it's very far. We have language issues as well. There are Spanish and Portuguese speaking countries over there. Some are English, but they're they're confined to the Caribbeans. But in the case of India and Brazil relations, one of the most interesting things is that even before our bilateral relations started picking up towards the early part of this century, our cooperation internationally was always very strong. And you mentioned about my stay in Brazil way back in 1999. One of the things that I noticed was that for almost a decade before that, India and Brazil had been cooperating in all international fora on a wide range of issues. And that's one of the strengths of our relationship internationally, that today India and Brazil are partners in 3 or 4 extremely exclusive and very important groups.
Right.
The G4, for example, which is on Security Council membership, the BASIC, which is on climate change, and BRICS, which is on overall cooperation, plus in IBSA. So this is apart from organizations like G20, where it's a larger grouping where India and Brazil are members. So it's very satisfying to see that our bilateral relations have also now picked up, and although they're not up to their full potential, but it's still much better and better reflective of the kind of cooperation that India and Brazil have had internationally.
Right. Professor Choli, if I can come to you now, as Ambassador Sinha mentioned, do you fear and suspect that probably India and Brazil interact more on the multilateral fora than bilaterally? You think there is a need and a sort of need to boost bilateral ties in trade investments, in climate change maybe, in defense and security, in biofuels. What's your take on the present the state of play in India-Brazil ties?
Ramesh, it's not a either or situation. We do need bilateral engagement which is based on more deliverables like economic, especially trade and investment, on which the 2 leaders are focusing right now. But of course the multilateral is important because in many ways it shows that both these countries aspire to lead the developing world and to be taking the cause of the global south for equity in the international system and the order. On bilateral, definitely the volumes of trade have been disappointing. I mean, it's 8 billion is the bilateral right now. They had prioritized to reach up to 25 billion or more, and Prime Minister was talking about 2023 when we have 75 years of diplomatic relations, we would want to reach bigger goalposts. So I think the agreements that were signed today will help. Now you look at energy cooperation, for example, their oil and gas, Brazil is a very reliable and a stable, relatively stable country in South America, unlike Venezuela, which is right next door and is going through convulsions. So eventually I envisage that Brazil will fill the gap that may arise from the instability in Venezuela for us. And despite the geographical distance, the tankers traffic across the oceans continues, and I think it will be a reliable. And even on bioenergy, the agreement for research on bioenergy shows that ethanol, Brazil is a leader in that field. So there are lots of concrete practical benefits we'll have. Tomorrow, day after tomorrow, after the Republic Day event, President Bolsonaro is chairing a business forum where there is an emphasis on defense industry cooperation and such things. So I think there are fields, even on animal husbandry, which Prime Minister mentioned, it's very interesting that Brazil, historically has had a huge, cattle ranch industry, and agribusinesses is the forte of Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro's popularity comes from the big support of the big commercial agricultural branch of Brazilian economy. And they, especially cattle rearing is a huge industry there. So if they can help improve the quality and the yield of cattle in India, it will be phenomenal addition. So there are lots of benefits we are getting. What are they getting from it, from the bilateral? It's very clear. I mean, Bolsonaro initially started with the view of wooing the West and trying to shift towards the pro-Western foreign policy, which is a departure from previous leaders like Lula or Cardoso. But now, the pragmatic realities, Ramesh, are such that, they need Asia, and especially big markets in Asia. So Indian investment, by the way, is quite huge. I mean, relatively speaking, because the Brazilian investment in India is still low. It's hardly $1 billion. But Indian investment is already $6 billion. There's a lot of privatization going on. Their, electricity sector is being opened up. Their utilities are up for grabs. So our companies, some of our companies are going out. But Prime Minister will want them to also invest here. And that's to facilitate that process. For a reverse flow of funds from Brazil to India, we need foreign investment from all quarters to pull out of the sluggish growth right now. So I think this partnership is truly developmental, and the more we stress on the bilateral, it will make it a kind of a concrete thing on the basis of which then we can, what Prime Minister was saying, कि अंतर्राष्ट्रीय मंचों पे हम हमेशा साथ रहें, that will go even higher provided Bolsonaro sees the economic benefit of the relationship, and that's what we are trying to reinforce in this visit.
Indeed. You've raised a number of valid points there, Professor, but if I can come to Ambassador Sinha, you now. Now, India and Brazil signed the Strategic Partnership Agreement in 2006, so it's been 14 years since then. As Professor mentioned, that Brazil might be looking eastward to newer markets in Asia, namely India and probably China as well. So in your estimation, is there a synergy between India's requirements and Brazil's expectations, and it's a good match and a marriage, so to speak?
Well, yes, both countries have a lot of items in common, and we are both continental-sized countries. We are both multi-ethnic, multicultural countries, and we are both democracies. That's extremely important.
Indeed, indeed.
And that ensures that our partnership is based upon mutual interest. If you look at our trade, for example, it is almost balanced. There's very slight, I think, deficit against us, but that's a very minor one. That shows how balanced the relationship is between the two countries. As I said, internationally we cooperate, for example, on the most important thing, which is the permanent membership of the Security Council, where India and Brazil have common interests there. Climate change, we have been negotiating together for over 2 decades now. So these are areas in which we have extremely common interests. Besides, in our worldview, there are very few differences, which is why in the IBSA, which is India, Brazil, and South Africa, we have consultations at the summit level on issues of global interest. So these are areas in which set the platform for our relationship. Now, in terms of cooperation, there's a lot of Indian investment, as Professor mentioned, in Brazil.
Right.
Brazil has been the doorway for India to Latin America, because our first major export to South America was the pharma sector, and that started with Brazil coming to India to buy medicines from us for AIDS. And that was the beginning of our bilateral trade, which has now picked up and it spread so much into other areas as well. We have had cooperation in the Embraer aircraft,
right,
in which Brazil has a fairly advanced industry. Brazil is interested in Indian technology, in Indian investments. So they have been seeking our investments in the pharma sector, as well as in mining and other engineering sector areas. Some of our big companies have gone and invested in Brazil. India has been generally lagging behind other countries in investing in Brazil, because Brazil is a huge economy. It's a very small population of barely 200 million people. So, and it's 3 times India's size. So numerous resources in agriculture as well as in minerals. So Brazil is seeking investment, and it is an opportunity that Indian companies have to go to Brazil and for investment and for promoting bilateral trade.
Absolutely. Professor Cholia, I want to dwell a bit on one point you mentioned, that's Bolsonaro's ambition or aim to woo the West, so to speak. Now, in that context, we have 3 leaders in the Americas and in India. We have President Trump in the US, President Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Prime Minister Modi in India. Now, they seem to share a similar worldview. Now, is there scope for cooperation or a plurilateral cooperation among the 3 countries, given the affinities among these 3 world leaders?
Well, Ramesh, I will say that they are somewhat different. Bolsonaro has more in common with Trump because he's more like a far right kind of a politician who espouses quite extreme views in some cases. I think our Prime Minister is quite centrist, and he carries along many sections of society. Bolsonaro is trying to radically redefine the Brazilian identity, national identity. But interestingly, both in the case of Trump and Bolsonaro, their bureaucracies and the diplomatic paraphernalia and the intelligentsia are in many ways preventing radical shifts. So I think especially in the case of Brazil, I think they have a very strong foreign ministry and a tradition of global involvement and all that. So even if Bolsonaro has some populist instincts, I don't think he is able to fulfill them. In fact, that is the reason he has already been to China. He has come to India in a big way for one of our major celebrations. It shows that that global South orientation is not going to go away, no matter what the president's own personal ideological beliefs are. And as far as a triangular cooperation goes, I would say that, look, our approach to Latin America has always been on the basis of common agenda, which is to reorder reshape the world. And often we run into Western domination of major institutions. So there is more of a tango between us and Brazil, where we have a lot in common. For example, in World Trade Organization, historically we've always synced our positions, and we have often been on the same side. There are sometimes, Brazil has cases against us and so on, but overall I would say that it's more like the global south has a major opportunity because of Trump, because Trump, despite Bolsonaro's wish to endear himself to Trump, the US market remains quite closed. The American protectionist walls and barriers are increasing. So he has to look, for practical reasons to elsewhere. That's why all this push Brazil to have preferential trade agreements with a slew of countries, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, possibly India. Mercosur is a bloc that Brazil leads, and that one also is very keen on India. And already China, has dominated the space. So I think they want some kind of a balancer. And there I think we can always play a role. The only thing is we need to prioritize some areas where, we have common interests. And as Prime Minister was saying, and as Ambassador was saying, geopolitically there is zero mistrust.
Right.
You see, that's the great thing. Because of the geography, we don't compete for the same influence in the same spaces. So therefore, there's more synergy and convergence. If Brazil rises, if its economy comes back on track and grows, we will welcome it. We will not see it as a threat, and vice versa. So I think that is where we need to capitalize on it, and surely the captains of industry of both sides will find ways, because ultimately if the leadership are giving direction and saying, look, India is a priority, if Brazil says that, if the president says that and the foreign minister says it, I'm sure that the industry will look at it. Likewise, our CII and ASSOCHAM and FICCI and all of them are very keen on Brazil. They know it's big, and I think in a way the door is opening for something much bigger that's going to come.
Indeed. Ambassador Sinha, since you mentioned about South-South cooperation, you mentioned the three groupings, BRICS, IPSA and BASIC. Now, let's focus a bit about IPSA in particular. Now, the three countries in question, India, Brazil, South Africa, do you think they might have lost the momentum over the last several years? Is there a need to reinvent or to give a new idea, so to speak, or push to the idea of IPSA?
Well, there has been a slight setback to this, but it's not because of the lack of commonality or lack of effort. The basic problem has been the economic slowdown in all these countries.
Right.
So, and that is part of the global slowdown that has taken place. So, as we look to the future, and both Brazil and India are trying to realize their full potential, as is South Africa, it is because of our commonality of views that it was decided that these three countries, which represent one country each from each of the continents, and because of the commonality of views, these three countries thought that they should meet at the senior most level and discuss international affairs where they could kind of give a lead to the South on issues of interest to the South. Now, it is here that India and Brazil come in, because as I said, we are both countries that are trying to realize our full potential. Our trade is complementary, our political views are very similar. We have very few differences on our world view between us, and it is this that ensures that whether we are talking about trade, despite the minor disputes that we may have over trade issues,
right,
politically and in even also in trade matters and in terms of economic cooperation, the sky is the limit for that.
Indeed. Professor, since we mentioned about the geographical distance between the two countries in question, Brazil and India, do you think people-to-people ties could bridge the gap, so to speak, in terms of occupying the mind space in the two countries, in terms of boosting cooperation in culture, in tourism, maybe views, or they employ Bollywood, the Indian films, music, dance, to grab eyeballs and to grab the mind space, so to speak, in Brazil?
Absolutely, Ramesh. The social security agreement that the two leaders just oversaw, which was signed, that's very significant, because that is to enable the expats, the Indians who are working in Brazil, which are about 4,000 people, and Brazilians working in India about only 1,000, to give them, incentives, because earlier there was a kind of potential like a double taxation, a kind of double payment of social security dues on both sides, which was harming remittances and such things. So this agreement can be the basis on the way on which we can expand people mobility on both sides. Tourism is fantastic. I mean, Brazil is extraordinary. I mean, from the Amazon forest to the the Atlantic coast, it's a beautiful country, and Indians would want to go. It's just that connectivity needs to improve. As Ambassador was saying, it's relatively shorter now, but still far. And the other thing is, in the imagination of the people of India, Brazil is still like a distant idea,
Indeed.
They can think of, Copacabana beach or, samba and carnival.
Indians, can't seem to think beyond football and samba
yeah,
and the
soccer.
carnival.
But I think, see, the real strength of Brazil is its 200 million people.
Absolutely.
And that is where the President Bolsonaro was talking. We are now the fate of 1.5 billion, 1.3 billion on our side, 200 million.
True.
By Latin American standards, that's not small, because whole of Latin America is only 650 million. So Brazil is almost 1/3 of the entire southern of the Western Hemisphere, of the southern South America. So I think we need to build those bridges. Academic cooperation also was mentioned by Prime Minister. So these are areas where, because they operate mainly through Portuguese medium, and we are, because of British colonialism, we have the English, there's been a bit of a problem. But over time, I find Brazilian middle classes are increasingly aspirational, want to integrate into global economy, and they are taking to English. So I think eventually that will also bridge, and we need to, through these governmental facilitation, the society to society linkages must be strengthened, because that is going to make it a thick relationship, where people instantly say, aha, Brazil, it's so important. We don't even have to justify it on TV or in print media anymore.
Absolutely. Ambassador Sinha, since you have the benefit of having served in Brazil, do you think boosting people-to-people ties can actually help bring the two countries and their peoples closer together? And is language a handicap, as Professor was hinting? Because language was not a handicap in India-France ties in terms of boosting education, scholarships, and people-to-people exchanges, or in the case of China, for instance. So why is language a particular handicap when it comes to Latin America as a whole?
Well, it is a bit of a handicap, because a lot of the Indian diaspora that moves out is in English-speaking countries.
Okay.
And Brazil, being Portuguese-speaking, has faced that handicap. In fact, one of the strange things is that Brazil has a very large diaspora from almost all major countries in the world except India. Indians are there in very few numbers, despite the fact that there is a very old link. In fact, Brazil was discovered by the Europeans while on their way to India, the second trip that came after Vasco da Gama, strayed into Brazil. And that's how Brazil was discovered. And for several hundred years, Brazil was only an outpost for the Portuguese on their way coming to India. But that has not helped in having a large Indian diaspora in Brazil. That is extremely important. Language is a hindrance over there, because Portuguese is not widely spoken, has not spoken at all in India, not even in Goa, I think, at the moment.
Indeed. Gentlemen, I'm completely running out of time. On that note, I want to thank my guests, Ambassador Sinha and Professor Chole, for joining me on this special broadcast. And that's a wrap on this special program on DD India. But news continues here. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.